Hello, good morning, everyone. We have reached just over 200 attendees for this UKRO webinar on the MSCA Postdoctoral Fellowships. My name's Anja Berndt. I'm the current national contact point for the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions. So some of you might have already been in contact with me and now see a face to the emails, and some of you I have not met yet. If I will be sharing a presentation and go through the presentation with you, we will later publish this presentation as well as the questions, so you should find a Q&A function somewhere on your Teams. Please feel free to add any questions during the time. After the presentation, I should be able to answer any questions. Some we might have to take away if they're very specific or a bit more complicated, but we will see. And I think without further ado, I will attempt to share the slides and get going. So, right. So as I said, my name's Anja Berndt and I'm the current NCP for the MSCA. Just need to move something out of the way. Right, yeah. First, a bit about UKRO. So we support UK-based organizations that are involved in European research and innovation, and our mission is to maximize UK participation in Horizon Europe. We have a UKRO portal, which has dedicated news articles, events, and fact sheets to support participation, and also alerts to upcoming opportunities and call dates. And then we are providing the national contact points for the ERC, MSCA, widening, COS, New European Bauhaus, and we are part of UKRO's international team. On the UK participation in Horizon Europe, so the UK is associated to Horizon Europe. That took effect on the 1st of January 2024. So that means that UK entities can participate in and coordinate project and receive funding from Horizon Europe, with the exception of the EIC Accelerator Investment Fund. And if you follow those links, as I said, we will share these slides. You'll find more detailed information. Then I would like to give you a short introduction to MSCA. So the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions set out to support researcher training and career development, create impact on researchers, institutions and system, contribute to EU priorities such as the Green Deal, the climate action, the European research area and the education area. It does this through encouraging people to become researchers and innovators, equipping researchers with the necessary skills and international experience. The mobility is key here: international, intersectoral, interdisciplinary, supporting long-term employability, developing attractive career opportunities and employment conditions, fostering an innovation and develop entrepreneurial mindset. And there's also a focus on a strong collaboration with the non-academic sector. Fostering an R&I environment based on excellence in research, and that is for the researchers themselves and the organizations, and also promoting the EU's global attractiveness for talent. So there are various MSc actions, doctoral network, staff exchanges, co-fund, and MSCA citizens. And today I'm going to focus on the postdoctoral fellowships, the call that has opened last week, which enhances the creative and innovative potential of researchers holding a PhD. Now, let's get on with those fellowships. The basics, as I said, they enhance the creative and innovative potential of postdoctoral researchers. They fund all research areas, from the arts and humanities to life science to engineering, anything you can think of. The fellowship lasts between 12 and 36 months, depending on the type of fellowships. I will explain that later. All fellowships can include short stays, research trips, fieldwork, secondments and placements in the non-academic sector, and they're all optional. And fellows can be recruited to either the academic or the non-academic sector. There are two types. There is the European Fellowship, which lasts between 12 and 24 months. They are open to any nationality, and you can either move from a European member state or from any country in the world to a different member state. What I will explain later, the so-called mobility rule applies here to the host organization that sits in the member or associated country. Then there are the global fellowships. So you start off, you apply from being in a member state or an associated country. You will spend 12 to 24 months in a third country, and then you will return to a member state or associated country and spend a mandatory 12-month return phase. Now for this, the mobility rule applies to the outgoing phase, i.e. the third country, and you must be an EU national long-term resident to be able to apply to that one. Now this is a busy slide. Eligibility criteria can be hard to get your head around, but I'll try to make it easy. So the fellow, or also known as the researcher, they must be in a possession of a doctorate degree or successfully defended their doctoral thesis. So it must be unconditionally. Since that date of the unconditional defense, there must have been a maximum of 8 years of equivalent research experience. There are exceptions if you go on maternity leave, paternity leave, national service, career breaks, etc. Then this time will be deducted. As I said, the European Fellowship is open to any nationality, the Global Fellowship to EU nationals and long-term residents. The mobility rule. You cannot have resided or carried out your main activity in the country of the host institution or the host of the outgoing phase for more than 12 months in the 3 years immediately before the call deadline. And you will need to be able to document this. So, for example, if you started to work in the UK last year at the end of September, let's say the 20th of September, that's when your work contract starts, and you want to apply to the UK, but you actually moved to the UK at the beginning of September, let's say the 2nd, then you will go over because you will have resided in this country longer. You also need to think about certain things about, do you actually have the potential to reach independence during the fellowship? Can you clearly demonstrate your experience and skills, etc.? What are your future career prospects? Do you have clear scientific and training goals? For the host organization, there are also some criteria. So the beneficiary, the one that gets the money from the European Commission, must be the host of the European Fellowship and the host of the return phase of a global fellowship. They must be located in a member state or associated country. They can be of any legal entity with or within outside academia. And they recruit the postdoctoral researcher. The associated partner is the host of the outgoing phase of the global fellowship and the secondment and placement host. They can also be any legal entity, and they can be located anywhere in the world. Now, very important is the host organization actually aware of your submission? Have you been in contact with the host organizations for support? How will you be integrated in the host institution? And do they have the skills and experience to help you with your project objectives? Then we have another role, the supervisor, that we will be supervising the fellow. They must provide an appropriate level of supervision. Well, think about what actually would be appropriate for your career stage and project. They should have a very active role in the proposal development. It can be built on an existing collaborative relationship. Just justify this in your application. They can consider mentorship or support for themselves as well if they haven't been a supervisor for very long or haven't done this before. Additional individuals can take on this mentor or co-supervisor role. The supervisor needs to be committed and involved for the full duration of this fellowship, and there are guidelines available that have been recently updated. So again, you will need to show how will this supervision work day to day, and have you actually explained these arrangements. Now, money makes the world go round. There is money involved. So this is a unit contribution scheme, and more details can be found in the work program. So there is the living allowance, the mobility allowance, and if applicable, the family allowance that constitutes the gross salary of the recruited fellow. So that goes obviously minus all the national contributions, tax, social security, etc., goes to the fellow. There is the option of a long-term leave allowance or special needs allowance if B, and they can be requested at any time. On the research organization side, you have institutional unit contributions per person month. So these are the research, training, and networking contributions. They are at 1,000 euros. They are to cover costs related to the training, career development, and the research of the fellow. And then you have the management and indirect contribution of 650 euros. They cover the general cost of the host institution connected to the organizing and implementing the fellowship. And it all depends on the person month. So if you requested 24 person months for the fellow, you will be getting the unit contributions on the institute side also for 24 months. What you have to keep in mind for finance is that they are managed by the host institution according to the usual internal policies. It's always good for the institutions to explain how the salary will be calculated. As I said, the family long-term leave and special needs allowance can be requested when and if the need arises. The living allowance, mobility allowance, and family allowance contribute to the annual salary and are subject to all national deductions, both on the employee and the employer side. The RTN costs cover every professional activities, and which include visa costs and a surcharge relocation costs. As I said, the management indirect, the general costs of the host institution connected to the organizing and implementing the fellowship. The funds can be redistributed to associated partners, for example, secondment, placement, research visual host, and that requires an agreement between partners. And UK institutions, because all these numbers are obviously in euros and will be paid in euros, can optionally apply a conservative exchange rate that protects the institution and fellow from exchange rate fluctuations. However, payments must be adjusted to the real exchange rate eventually. So, what's included in terms of activities? So I said there are secondment, short stays, and placements. They are all optional, and proposals will not be penalized for not including a secondment or academic placement. Secondments and short stays, they happen during the fellowship duration. Secondments are an integral part of the proposal and must add significant value to the fellowship. They will be assessed during evaluation. And however, they don't need to be named in the proposal yet. There is a limit of 1/3 of the time that can be spent of secondments. Obviously, they must be in line with the project objectives and the training needs, and they also must have a clear supervisory arrangement. Short stays can be planned in advance, in line with when they come up. Again, they must be in line with the project objectives, and they don't need a defined supervisor arrangement. Now, the non-academic placement can happen after the fellowship ends, up to 6 months at the end of the fellowship. Now, also, they must be an integral part of the proposal and will be assessed during the evaluation. However, if it does turn out it's not eligible, your proposal will still be evaluated. It will just be cut out. It must have an added value for the project and the career development of the fellow, and it must have clear supervisory arrangements. There are other key elements. So excellence, impact, and implementation are vital to your project. So you need to think about how you can incorporate gender and the gender dimension of your research, open science and open science practices, dissemination, exploitation, and communication plans, public engagement, impact, not only scientific, but also societal and economic, the quality of the supervision, and also very important, the integration in the team and institution. It is all about how you are part of your host institution and how you contribute and how knowledge is shared. Now, we covered the basics, so now we're going to the submission process. So what you need to start is register and create an account on the EU Funding and Tenders portal. Then, very important, familiarize yourself with all the available guidance and documents. There are a lot. There are various links to click through. Please do so. Max out your browser and have a look at them all. Then contact your host institution or institutions and discuss the proposal writing and the submission process, when will happen and what will happen, who will be involved. Very important, it needs to be clearly communicated. Then you can start the application in the system. Then you develop your application and proposal. And finally, you can submit early and often. Whatever version will be submitted at the deadline will be accepted. Right, so the Funding and Tenders portal, if you haven't seen it before, so this is a screenshot. So where it says sign in, it also gives you the option to register. On the left-hand side on your page, you find something called conditions and documents. This is where you find all the information, the link to all guidance material that is available. This is step 2. Then when you actually start the submission, you have to decide which fellowship you want to apply to, the European or the global, and you can only choose one. You cannot submit 2 applications. There's only 1 application per researcher. Step 3, contact your host and discuss the submission. Get in touch with the research office as soon as possible, because they will be able to provide support for the submission process. The submission should be finalized by the supervisor on behalf of the host, i.e. the beneficiary, because the beneficiary will be responsible for all the financial arrangements. And all the legal responsibility lies with the beneficiary, including signing the grant agreement. So if you put your host in the system, it looks like this. They will need a PIC. That's a number code. Your host is likely to already have this. If not, they need to apply one, and that I need to register on the portal, and that can take a while. Then you need to specify your role, if you are a supervisor, a researcher, or a contact person. Now, a supervisor and researcher are not the same person, very important. And contact person should be the research office of the beneficiary. When you then get to your application, There is part A, that's on the right-hand side of the screen. And this is everything that you complete online. It's more the admin basics. And on the left-hand side of the screen, you will find part B. You prepare this offline and submit it as a PDF. On the left-hand side, you will also find IT support and online manual for the whole system, which is very useful. And you download the part B template from there as well. Then there is support available when you develop your application or proposal. So there is, for example, a presentation with the most common mistakes in the proposal submissions. Very common one is around associated partners. You have to add associated partners, and they are the host for the outgoing phase in a global fellowship, and you list them first. Then you would list a host for the non-academic placement if you have one, but you would not encode any secondment hosts. They come later in part B. So as I said, part A is mainly administrative forms. They're filled in online. They're often pre-populated. A lot of times you will find a little question mark or a button you can click on, and it will tell you some information and some guidance. So it's much easier than it looks initially. For the beneficiary, as I said, you need the participant information code, which is PIC. You will need the outgoing host for the global fellowship and the non-academic placement host. From the researcher, you will need the PhD award date. You will need documentation about the 8-year experience, if applicable. It will pop out automatically if your PhD award date is longer than 8 years ago. And then also, very important, it will require the countries of residence for the past 5 years. On the budget table, please make sure that everything is filled in correctly. And then you will also need other information, for example, related publications, research project and infrastructure, gender equality plan, and the ethics self-assessment. Now, on the budget table, as I said, the funding is based on unit costs multiplied by requested person months. So this is just an example. If you have the fellowship in the first line, if you have a non-academic placement and an outgoing phase, you would list that as additional roles. For fellowships in the UK, a country coefficient applies. You can find this number in the work program. As I said, family allowance can be requested at any time, but if they, for example, already married and have kids, you can put it in the application. And then for the research, training and networking costs, that includes the funding for secondments and short stays. Then the scientific panel. So each proposal must be assigned to one of the 8 panels, which is chemistry, social sciences and humanities, economic sciences, information science and engineering, environment and geosciences, life sciences, mathematics, and physics. The budget per panel will be determined by the number of proposals, so it's not yet determined. And you should select the panel by the best fit to the keywords. Do not select by previous success rates or popularity. That is not a good strategy. Really look at the keywords. You can use up to 5 descriptors in your actual proposal and do it that way around. As I said, do not select by success rates or popularity. The keywords will actually determine your evaluator, so it's really important to get that right. The ethics and security questions. This section does not affect eligibility. You might be asked to provide some additional information afterwards. But don't be worried. It does not affect eligibility. You can follow the guidance on how to complete that, and anytime you put a yes, this might be requiring a brief statement or some documents. And UK applicants tick yes to non-EU activities. Then part B. So, consists of two parts. It will become clear when you've downloaded the template. So part B1, basic application details, declarations in section 1 to 3, just follow the instructions. However, there is a very strict 10-page limit. And then you have part B2 with sections 4 and 9 with no page limit. And there are also instructions provided. The file must be uploaded as a PDF, and you won't be able to submit otherwise. You have to complete all the mandatory tables and have to use the required subheadings, although you can add additional ones. Do not alter the existing ones or remove the existing headings. You should divide your deliverables into scientific deliverables and management, training, recruitment, and dissemination deliverables. And you should define milestones to chart your progress, and they can be linked to deliverables. And any references should be listed in footnotes. Information you provide by hyperlink only will not be considered. As I said with the subheadings, do not alter, move, or delete tags. That is put in there for a reason. Stick to the formatting rules that are detailed in the actual template, and do not attempt to outsmart the formatting rules. Do not try anything like, oh, I use Arial narrow. No, stick with what is said in the rules. Otherwise, you risk the eligibility of your proposal. Now, letter of commitment. That is mandatory for the global fellowship, and that is between the beneficiary of and the associated partner for the outgoing phase. So the minimum requirements for these are official heading or stamp from the institution. It needs to be up to date, so don't have it dated from now when the or have it dated from January when the call open was last week. It needs to demonstrate the will to participate in this specific project, and it needs to explain their precise rules. If there's any information missing, this may negatively affect the evaluation. Again, you should think about how will supervision work day to day, how will the integration in the team work, what are the policies, for example, on gender, open science of the host, and how do they align with the requirements, and what are the career development aspects of this phase. Why this host at this time? Why is it not just a holiday in some nice place with a lovely beach? Right, so you've done all this, you've got that far, you've submitted, you took a deep breath, deadline has come and passed, and then it goes to the evaluation. So the evaluation workflow is that they will receive the proposal, then there will be an individual evaluation, there will be a consensus group, a panel review, and a finalization. As I said, there will be the keywords you choose will determine the evaluators, and there's an automatic pre-allocation of 3 evaluators by the Research Executive Agency based on those. They will score in a range of 5 excellent to 0 fails. And scores and comments are always based on the consensus of the evaluators, not the average, for example, but really they sit together, discuss the proposals. Additional evaluators can be involved if required. If there's an impasse, for example, and they just can't agree on anything, you might bring in an additional. Evaluators can also reject the allocation if they think it's outside their expertise or a conflict exists. Now, the evaluators will be of 3 different nationalities, and the rapporteur, the one that shares the final summary report, is usually an experienced evaluator. And you will not receive individual evaluation reports, you will only receive the evaluation summary report. Now, the evaluation criteria outlined in the work program, they correspond to the sections in the call template B1. And I recommend that you use the MSCA Postdoctoral Fellowship Handbook, which has lots of tips and tricks in addition to all the other relevant guidance documents and policy. And also keep in mind to make it easy for the evaluators to actually find the information. So we have excellence, which counts for 50%. We have impact, and which accounts for 30%, and quality and efficiency of the implementation, which is 20%. Now, I don't think I need to go into the details of each of these tables. But for example, for excellence, if it is ambitious, and does it go beyond the state of the art, interdisciplinarity, the gender dimension, how the transfer of knowledge works. Then the quality and capacity of the host institution is very important. As I said, how is the setup in the team? How does this fellowship contribute to the skills of the researcher? You know, how do you maximize the expected outcomes? What is your contribution to the scientific society and economic impacts? And really make sure that you invest time in writing and proofreading. Ask trusted friends, trusted academics, and also make sure you use a clear language and explain any jargon. Even if it is jargon that is commonly used in your country, it might not be used in others, so you might have to think about explaining it. Scoring and ranking. So the proposals are funded in ranking order per panel. The final ranking is approved by the panel vice chairs. If there are equal scores, the prioritization is decided by the panel based on the scores for award criteria. The distribution of the indicative budget is proportional to the number of eligible proposals received in each panel, which I said earlier. It is a highly competitive scheme, and the cut-off scores are usually higher than 90 or 95. It really depends on the panel. So the distribution of scores and the cut-offs are published on the core page. What will happen is when the funding is used up, there will be a so-called reserve list. So you might not be able to be funded directly, but if one of the selected project drops out, you might get an email saying that you can now be funded, and this process can take up to a year, but should be usually done by the end of summer. But, you know, if you're on the reserve list, not all hope has gone. And also, yeah, if once you receive your scores and the rank, we cannot give out the ranking of the individual proposals. That is something that is not being done, I'm afraid. We're always getting a lot of emails about that, but sorry, we have to be strict on this and we cannot give out any rankings. What happens if things don't go as planned, i.e. you're not getting funded? As I said, there's a reserve list. There are proposals above the threshold, but outside the available funding, and they can be promoted to the main list until the end of the following year of the call deadline. So it would be until December 2026. Again, we can also not give you the position on where you are on the reserve list. That is not something we are available to do. There is a so-called redress procedure. if you are not agreeing with the evaluation or the process. How you start this will be outlined in your decision letter. You have to be aware that if you ask for a re-evaluation, your scores can also decrease. They cannot only increase your scores, but you might be worse off. Then there's the resubmission. If you've scored less than 70%, you must not resubmit it. If you have a proposal involving the same recruiting organization or associated partner for the outgoing phase and the individual researcher, you must also not resubmit your proposal. And if you resubmit, you must still meet all eligibility criteria. So in terms of mobility and PhD experience, for example, that's very important. That often throws in a spanner in the works that you still meet eligibility criteria. Right, then let's go to resources and timeline. So as I said, the call page is hosted on the EU Funding and Tenders portal. It opened last week. The deadline for submission is the 10th of September this year, and it is 5 o'clock in the afternoon Brussels time, so please be aware of that. Europe is ahead of us by 1 hour. Please make sure you don't submit at 1700 UK time. The information on the outcomes of evaluations is expected February, March next year. You would be expected to sign the grant agreement April next year, and with a prospective start date from May onwards. And as I said, you can submit right to the deadline, and you can submit several times, and please do so because the Commission collects whatever is in the system or at the time of the deadline. Now there is just a long list of additional resources of what is available. Strategic plan, the financial guide is also a very good document. The home pages of the research executive agency, etc. I can only recommend and that you have a look at this, and you will be able to access these links. That leaves me with a thank you. Thank you for listening to me rambling on here. And I hope I will be able to take some questions now. And I haven't seen any Q&A, so there might already be a lot of in there. So yeah, thank you for listening, and I'll stop sharing and head over to the questions. Right, so what do we have? And if my colleagues from UKRO are there and need to point out something to me, please do so. So the latest, okay, we have, for example, the latest that project can start. So that's usually the year after, so 2 years after the deadline. Can a supervisor get involved in the supervision of more than one fellow if there's any limit on the number of fellows supervised by a single supervisor? Well, no, there isn't. There is no limit. A supervisor can supervise more. However, they will need to make sure they explain their capacity in the proposal. So if you have 5 researchers, you need to make sure you explain this, how you will be able to have appropriate supervision of those. Oops. Just looking for the typical success rates for the schemes. As I said, it's very competitive. We're looking at around maybe 15%. You need usually to score higher than 90 to 95 to be successful. I think for the UK, the latest number was around 17%, slightly higher than the overall average. The letter of commitment, for the GF letter of commitment, what is meant by between the beneficiary and the associate partner, that it should not be addressed to the researcher, but to the beneficiary host. Yeah, that's correct. It needs to be the beneficiary and the associated partner. As I said, the legal requirement and the legal responsibilities, same as the financial, all lie with the beneficiary. Hence, it must be the host. Association. What have we got here? Examples of the types of documentary evidence that should be obtained from the researcher to prove mobility requirements. So that's usually, if you're looking at residency, this could be a stamp and a passport. That could be a visa document. This could be your work contract you have, timesheets, whatever you as an organization would usually accept. Would work for that. What else do we have? Is it the postdoctoral fellow applicant who registers on the system, or the supervisor, or both? It is indeed both, and you have to specify your role in the proposal, and you both can work on the proposal. Who writes the proposal, the fellow or the supervisor? Ideally, it should be a joint undertaking. You should work with the supervisor and with the fellow, and also with advice, hopefully from your research office, to get this proposal over the line or in the system. If you have done a PhD alongside working as researchers full-time, will the maximum 8 years experience start from the date of the end of the PhD or from all the research experience? No, the 8 years will start from the date of your PhD award. If your PhD award is from today, but you've already done 8 years research, it doesn't matter. Today's date will count. Can the supervisor be based in the global partner organization? You will require a supervisor in the global partner organization. You cannot just send the fellow there on their own. We have a question around the mobility eligibility criteria. We have a UK national and resident who's completed their PhD in the UK and wants to remain in the UK. Are they not eligible to apply? No, not to apply for a fellowship to the UK. You could move to a different EU or associated country. That would be because, as I said, the key is mobility here. You could also apply to a global fellowship and spend, for example, a year or two in Canada. No, not Canada, sorry, bad example. Let's say the US, and then come back to the UK. That is possible. You can do this. Does the applicant have to hold a doctoral degree or to successfully defend their thesis by the time the postdoctoral position begins or by the application deadline. It is the application deadline. That is what counts. You need to be a PhD by that time, and it needs to be given unconditionally. There have been no important changes since last year that I'm aware of in the system. Then we have more on the global fellowships. Is there a list of countries eligible? Any third country, any country that is not associated to Horizon Europe or is not a EU member state. So you've got a pick of probably around 120 countries, so everywhere you want to go. So if you're already a senior researcher and have more than 8 years research experience, no, you cannot apply. You will not be eligible, I'm afraid. Is part A to be filled out by the candidate or the supervisor? I think both can do it. I would do it probably the supervisor, because they probably know or have better experience with it. You need to discuss this. Sometimes potentially the research office might also be able to help you. I think this is where it comes into force, where we say, oh, please talk to your organization. If the supervisor is a senior lecturer and not a full professor, can this affect the application? It should not, as long as you can justify that the supervision is appropriate, then you should be fine. I know there have been questions about finance and what exactly comes out of the RTN and the management and contribution costs. I will pick these questions up in a more detailed way. I think there's a bit too difficult at the moment to just do it right here. So career stages. Yeah, an applicant can apply up to 8 years. And if the relative career stage taken into consideration in the evaluation. I think you need to go back on the evaluation criteria on that, and you would need to specify how exactly this is adding value to the career of the researcher and how the researcher is benefiting from this. So if you're a very experienced postdoc, for example, you might benefit in a different way. So you might have to explain this in a different way. So there is no yes or no answer. I think you need to really set it out very clearly in your proposal. What should be the typical start date? That really depends on you. It usually takes a while to arrange everything. You are required normally to move countries, so that from own experience, that can take a while. So being told in February, March, I would not assume that you can properly start in April unless you're already living in the country. So my guess would be sometime over the summer, but that's just personal opinion. If I have resided in the UK but have not carried out any research and other work for more than a year, am I eligible to apply? I'm sorry, you're not, because you have resided, and the criteria states that you have to either had your main activity or resided. So unfortunately, if you've just lived in the UK for a year, you're also gone over the threshold. Yes, you can apply as a dual national, EU and UK, whatever. So, for example, the global fellowships that require a dual European or associated country membership, you can apply to that, but you can also apply to the European. That is fine. You can include previous supervisors as a collaborator. You should justify why. You should explain why. As I said, it's all about new experiences. So you really want to make sure if you're doing something that has been going on for a while, that you explain it. The non-academic placement, can it be in a land in which the applicant lived in the last 5 years? Yes, as far as I'm aware, there is nothing against that. Again, you have to explain why you would like that placement there, not just, oh, I've lived there for 5 years. No, it has to be a real reason. On the novice supervisor and their own professional development, that is actually can be included in the proposal. You might want to add some mentoring for the novel supervisor in that, really to show that, yes, they are new, but they're taking steps to ensuring they're giving appropriate supervision. And if you look at the supervisor guidance, that will help you out. Can the research be carried out remotely? No, teleworking is not allowed. It is about moving there. It is about actually being in the other country. So that's not possible. As I said, yeah, teleworking is not an option. For the global scheme, must the order be outgoing first, then returning? Yes. You have to go out first and then have a mandatory return phase. There is no options of turning this around. The letter of commitment is not required for the European Fellowship. Which one is the most important part for the evaluation? Yeah, part B1 contains all the basics, but the details are in B2. And please do not forget that B2 will also be seen and will be part of the evaluation. The call so far has been announced every year, and I'm not aware of that this would be changing. Can supervisors be on a fixed-term contract as long as the end date of the contract is after the end of the MSCA Fellowship? Yes, that should not be a problem. I would not know why this shouldn't be the case. As I said, the supervision only needs to cover the full time of the fellowship. In terms of resubmissions, do we have to find a different hosting organization to resubmit our proposal next year? Yeah, I'm afraid. If it's below 70, you have to find a new host. Does working in teaching only position extend the 8 years postdoc PhD limit? Yes, it does. There is guidance available. So it does involve teaching, it does involve career breaks, maternity, paternity leave, long-term sickness. If you went on and did something completely different, it will all count and be deducted. So if you go and work for a funder, it will be deducted from your research experience, and I could still apply. I won't be, but I could. How much of an overlap can there be between our proposal and an already funded project? Well, obviously it has to be distinct, and you will have to provide some additional information on that project, but double funding is not allowed. It can be connected or a follow-on, but you cannot double fund. Right, what have we got? That's more again for budget. I will keep the budget questions for the written response, because that is a bit easier to do. The difference between the global and European fellowship. Yeah, so as I said, the European is open to any nationals, any nationalities. You will be required to move to a member state or an associated country. And you can move there from either a third country or a member state or associated country, as long as you move country. The global fellowship is open to EU nationals and nationals of associated countries and long-term residents. And you will spend an outgoing phase in a third country, and then you will come back for a mandatory return phase in a European country. Global application, can I go to the third country associated to Horizon? No, associated countries are not third countries. So you have to go to somewhere else. In the global, you have to go to any country that is not associated to Horizon Europe. Short stays in secondments, yes, can take place in the previous country of residency or main activity. But again, you have to justify why you want to go there. Just saying I've lived there does not work. Yes, the project can build on a previously funded project. That is absolutely fine. You do not need to start something completely new. You just need to justify. Right, hold on. What have we got? There's something, yeah, as I said earlier, I will, we've just moved from Zoom webinars to team webinars, and we're currently working out a way of making the recordings available. So hopefully we have the recordings available in a couple of weeks. You will find it on the event page. What I will publish anyway are the slides, and I will do a summary of the Q&A, where I go into details of the replies, and I will also look at all the budget questions, as they're usually a bit trickier to apply. Oh yeah, here's one. Furlough during COVID, does this count as career break and deducted? No, generally not. If you continued your contract with the organization and your employment, it will not be deducted. That is the latest from the European Commission we have. Only if you did not have a current contract, you will be deducted. Right. So I think I covered all the questions apart from the budget ones. I apologize for that. As I said, these are usually a bit trickier to go through. I have one last look, and I can also check if my colleagues flag anything to me, but I don't think they have. Colleagues, have I missed anything? This is your last chance of telling me. There's one more comment. Yeah, one more question about Do we need 2 supervisors? Yes. You do need a supervisor each, but you can return to the organization you're currently at. That's absolutely fine. The question on the start date, as I said, it can be, I think, up to 2 years, but I will follow up and check the exact dates that I don't jumble those up, but it's usually quite generous. You do not have to start immediately. Right. Okay. I see that questions are slowing down. Is it the supervisor who applies in the portal in our name? Yes, the supervisor would be the one submitting and hitting the final button. But as far as I'm aware, the researcher can also do it. It's within the workings of the system that the researcher can also submit, but the supervisor should be the one that's submitting. Is that another cost question that I will have to look up? Generally, any costs associated with the research can be claimed from the RTN budget. Again, the researchers with less experience will be judged with exactly the same. They will all be judged under the same criteria, the same excellence, impact, and implementation. Now, you will have to be able to write your proposal in the way that shows the excellence of somebody who's just finished their PhD. That will be different from somebody who just has already been a postdoc for 5 years. However, you will be able to explain that in your proposal, and the impact will be slightly different. But overall, the criteria will stay the same. And it is all about the development of that researcher. So from that point of view, a less experienced researcher can be as excellent in the development of their career as a researcher that's already been working as a postdoc for 5 years. You just need to be able to make that clear in your application and look at the criteria that are stated in the work program. Okay. One last look at questions. I can't see any more coming in. This was rather a whistle-stop tour, so if there's still anything unclear, please do get in touch. I'm more than happy to answer your questions. If you have emailed within the last week, then please do get in touch. Please be aware with me. I haven't been able to catch up with all the emails from last week. We were a bit understaffed due to the bank holiday, so you will be receiving your reply very soon.